Welcome to Power Players by Origis, critical thinking to deliver the promise of clean energy. This program brings you leading voices in solar and energy storage and sectors impacting renewables, exploring challenges and solutions for industry growth, the true cost of operating and maintaining power plants, and system asset management considerations. My name is Josh Corbett. I welcome you to this episode hosted by Michael Eyman, Managing Director of Origis Services. Welcome. Today on Power Players, we're going back to a familiar topic, the cost of O&M and what's happening in the marketplace today. So we have Leila Garcia from Mackenzie. Leila is responsible for wind and solar operations maintenance market research for the American region within WoodMac Power Renewables. She brings more than a decade of significant experience in the renewable energy industry in both mature and developing markets, from Denmark to Brazil and even Mexico. Prior to joining WoodMac, Leila worked as a marketing leader for Vestas, as well as marketing manager for GE Renewables in Mexico. She is Brazilian, but currently lives in Vancouver, Canada, and holds multiple degrees. The first one being an engineering degree from PUC University in Brazil, that's a Pontificia Universidade Católica, and a master's in renewable energy from Germany, Karl von Ossietzky University of Oldenburg. Leila, welcome to Power Players. I hope I didn't, brutalize any of those words too badly. If I did, feel free to say them correctly for everybody now so that they can get your background correctly, because we are lucky to have you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm glad to be here, and you did everything fine. You read all the names correctly, so kudos to you.
It's when you're trying to read these things out, it's so easy to just get twisted up, right? So I'm constantly trying to get these right.
So many languages, right? Portuguese, German, and English. So it's a mix of everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Thank you for joining us on Power Players today. So we're going to talk today about costing. And I think there's been a number of things that have happened globally right now. Everybody's aware, we're facing a global recession, while at the same time we've got some significant inflation in real wages and a lot of our goods and services. We've got inflation driven by not just the cost of fuel, but by supply chain issues globally and things that are happening globally and within the United States. But we're not going to have time today to solve the world's problems. So let's just talk about the U.S. market for today's purposes. Tell me a little bit about what you think. Where do you think costs and pricing are going for O&M services in the United States today, and why?
Yeah, sure. So unfortunately, we cannot solve the world problem here today. I wish we could. But we've been surveying the O&M solar industry for a long time now. We've been publishing reports about solar O&M for more than 5 years. And what we've been seeing over the years is that pricing has been going down very consistently. So we decided to do a bottoms-up approach, a model where we see what is the true cost of solar O&M. And what we found out is that cost is not expected actually to decrease any further. It's going to increase with time, just because it's based, the O&M solar service is based on labor. And labor, I don't think it's about to decrease anytime soon.
Do you know what percentage? I mean, from y'all's perspective, when you look at it, and I have my view, and I'll be happy to share it as well. But
let's compare.
Well, let's compare, right? But what do you guys see? What percentage of costs on a typical O&M contract you see being labor?
Yeah, so we've done an analysis, a global analysis, and for the U.S., an average of 70% is labor, and 30% would be equipment / spare. Yeah.
So my number that I throw out there, just, completely independent, is 60 to 70% are inflationary costs, most of that being, the vast majority being labor.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're very far off.
Very much aligned there.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. So having said that, when we model those numbers over the next 10 years globally, but again, let's focus on the US today. We also do a survey with the main players in the industry, including Origis.
Mm-hmm.
And the prices that we've seen in the industry, they are very close to the actual cost. So one of the main concerns and takeaways from this exercise is how are you guys going to remain profitable if the asset owners are expecting further price decrease if the cost is not about to decrease?
So taking the asset owner side of things for a second, why do they care if their O&M is profitable? Shouldn't they just grind away at the cost until they get the lowest cost, and then if the O&M operator goes out of business, they just can go find another one? Can't they just do that? Like, why not? I mean, I've seen that in the marketplace. That seems to be a prevailing sort of approach. And so I'm asking this that way because, I'm curious, if I'm that owner and I'm approaching it that way, why shouldn't I?
Yeah, so asset owners, they have been behaving that way. So what they really want to see is a very low figure for dollar per kilowatt per year.
Yeah.
And they have been squeezing service providers to get to this number. And that's a very interesting conversation that I want to get in. But just answering your question right away here, why do they care? It's because they are also interested in getting very high quality services. And for that, you need qualified technicians. And to have qualified technicians, you have to pay them well, and you have to have some systems in place. And this all require investment, and that ultimately reflects in the price you give to your client, right?
I think so many owners have looked at it from too much from just a financial perspective. But the reality is that if they are going to hit the production on these sites that they've modeled, if they have any hope of doing it at all, right? Part of that means people have to be really well trained, really familiar with the site, and they have to get to those issues very, very quickly. If you are constantly churning through service providers and churning through employees, chasing a dollar, what you're going to get is service providers and employees that are not familiar with those sites, that cannot resolve those issues as quickly as they can, and that is going to come out in the production and in the financials of those facilities. So I think it's really in their best interest to make sure that they provide a contract that allows some stickiness, not just for that service provider, but for that service provider's employees.
That's correct. And that's something that I believe it's our job to change the way we compare things. We have to compare apples to apples. So when you go to an industry event, it's very common that people just, okay, so how much are you paying for your project? Oh, I'm paying $3 per kilowatt per year. And I'm like, and the other person says, oh, I'm paying like $6, so I'm paying the double. So I'm going to go back to my service provider and tell him that I want this $3.
What, it's not the same? It's not the same? Come on, this is exactly the same, right, Leila? No,
what they were not considering is the size of the project. So whenever you go from a commercial, because at Wood Mackenzie, we have this methodology where we have DG is considered anything lower than 1 megawatt, and then utility scales everything up 5 megawatts actually. So we see a decrease from commercial and industrial to utility scale of more than 60% sometimes in terms of costs, right?
An increase?
Of decrease.
Yeah.
Of course, that's economies of scale, right? So
what do you attribute that to? You say economies of scale, but what specifically do you attribute that to? So I have my opinion about why you get different costs at different levels, and I'll weigh in on that in a second. But what do you attribute the economies of scale that WoodMac and you guys see when you model, going from DG to what you call utility scale projects, which I think you said was 5 megawatts and bigger?
Yeah. When a service provider has a certain volume of megawatts under asset management, They are able to distribute their labor force more efficiently over those projects. So they are able to dispatch certain technicians in a certain time to those projects. And of course, that will reflect in a better price for the final client. And also in terms of equipment investment, if you have in a certain area, you have a more a high megawatt density, you can use the same equipment over those several projects.
Do you find that customers do standardize and use the same equipment across projects in an area?
You mean the ones that are self-performing, or
just period? Do you see the industry sort of thinking about that and standardizing equipment in tight geographic areas? Because I have to be honest, I don't. I see them just buying whatever the cheapest thing is at the time, and you end up with this heterogeneous mess that you then have to figure out how to service, which means the people that show up have to not just be an expert on that site, but they have to be an expert on every possible iteration of every site that's in their geographic region.
Yeah, you're talking about like the modules and panels. Yes. So I believe we are starting to have this kind of more uniform approach. We've seen some initiatives from module suppliers where they are kind of, okay, let's do a one size kind of module where we can have a more standardized kind of supply chain. But we are not there yet. But although there is hope in the end of the tunnel, just because we are seeing some conversations around it, and that's a good starting point, at least.
Yeah. I think from the O&M, the operator's perspective, it's, the panels are not as big of a driver. It's really like the inverters, the quality of the the construction of the plant, and, then trackers, and then sort of your DC field and combiner boxes.
Yeah.
As much as you can standardize those in a portfolio, if you're an owner, whether it's a geographically dense or whether it's a bigger portfolio, the better off you are, because it allows you to flow those technicians between the sites more efficiently. And no one, no matter how good they are, can be an expert at every inverter they ever see.
That's right.
No one can have training from every inverter company for every inverter that they ever run across. It's an impossibility. So, as usual, when you have these complex problems, the more you can simplify them, the better off you are. And this is an area where the simplification must start at the procurement point, right, with the developer.
That's correct. But I believe that the industry is starting to really feel the pain now. For 2022, Wood Mackenzie is expecting that the U.S. Solar market will reach 140 gigawatts of installed capacity, and that's distributed generation and also utility scale. Yeah. But by 2030, we forecast more than 530 gigawatts of installed capacity. So we are going to have 4 times of what we have today of cumulative volume of solar installations. And that's when if the industry doesn't work together to really make the operation and maintenance of those solar projects easier, we are going to feel the pain in a few years. So that's why I say that we are just starting conversations about that now, but I believe we are in the right direction.
And owners, our owners reach out to us all the time, concerned about the labor that they have on the site, the level of expertise. But going back to something that you just said, and then after that, I want to circle back on something else. But you said 130 gigawatts going to 530 gigawatts by 2030. Is that what you said?
Yeah, exactly.
So thinking about that kind of growth, that is a roughly 7-year period from today. We're halfway through 2022. It's hard to believe, but we are. And so that means that we have to have 4 times the number of fully trained, qualified technicians in 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, if you're efficient, if service providers are efficient enough and you are able to kind of, share this labor through different sites, but approx between 3 and 4, I would say,
Right. So beyond inflation in the broader inflationary market, inflation on parts and services and goods and things that are reflected in sort of like the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, there's another issue here, which is the bidding up of labor because the growth rate of the industry means, by definition, you have to constantly pull in expertise and labor either from adjacent markets that has equivalent skill sets that are transferable, or at the lowest level, and then train and give them experience to make them better, all things which cost money. And those individual technicians within the market, when they gain that value and gain that experience, now have a fungible experience, a fungible basis of knowledge that they can, monetize.
Of
And so
course.
that means they're going to be looking around saying, who's going to pay me more now that I know more to continue to do what I do? And so that means that inflation in labor in solar is going to outpace.
Exactly, for different factors, as you just explained, for different reasons. And again, when an asset owner is looking for a lower dollar figure, they are actually putting their own solar power plant performance at risk. Because one, if they are not including all the activities that a solar power plant needs to perform well, those costs, they're going to have eventually to face those costs. And if it's not within the service agreement, you don't have a performance warranty in place, for example. So you're going to have to pay those ad hoc. And I believe that hiring those kind of services on as needed basis, they come as much more expensive if they were to be included in a full wrap service contract. So the whole dollar per kilowatt per year thing is very sometimes misleading for asset owners and for the industry, because it does not reflect all the maintenance activities a solar power plant need to perform well or perform as it should.
Yeah, and if anybody wants a breakdown, we used to have a visual of pancakes: preventive maintenance, corrective maintenance, ancillary services, and then additional services, and how those costs sort of, if you look at that, if you want to go to a place and order your breakfast one pancake at a time, you're probably going to pay more than if you buy all three.
For the combo, you're going to pay less.
Yeah, and this is really the same way. But if somebody wants a real good breakdown, we do have a previous Power Players on the true cost of O&M that like sort of gets into those layers and why contract costs are lower than off-contract costs, which are then the next cost, and then going to a full outside entity even costs even more, and why, and how you structure things to get to a lowest cost. But that beyond sort of this effect, sizing of plants makes a difference because it defines whether or not an individual plant generates enough man hours to be manned as a constantly manned facility versus an unmanned facility. At Origis, we draw the line between DG and O&M at about 40 plus or minus megawatts, because below 40 megawatts, you go to a dispatch model because it doesn't generate enough megawatts. This is broad speaking, scope and the equipment and batteries and things like that may move the needle, but you don't have enough man hours to man it full time. And what that means is you're dispatching and it's becoming part of a broader group of sites that is sharing those resources that are dispatching across them. What does that mean? That means that when the technician gets there, they may or may not be familiar with it, as familiar with the site as if it's their general workday, which means every time they need, well, where's the spare parts at? Where is this site at? What type of inverter is this? How are these?
Time.
That's time. Money. The other thing, and that's money. And the other thing that drives the time and money is, and I always imagine, do you remember the old Toonsis, the driving cat? The cat it was an old Saturday Night Live skit. They had this cat that would be driving. It was hilarious. But I always think of that. I think of Toonsis driving out to these sites, and you're paying that cat whether he's fixing an inverter or whether he's driving. So the driving time, the windshield time, as we call it, heavily burdens contracts that are dispatch based.
Correct. So the efficiency is much lower than
Exactly, because that technician is on the job and on the clock from the time he gets in his vehicle, right? When we have sites that are manned, just like working in any office, just like the office you're in today and the office I'm sitting in today, they start working when they arrive at their place of work in the site that morning. So that transit time is not part of the cost structure.
That's correct. And Michael, and because you touched on that point of time, I believe that something else that we need to have in mind is that a lot of the activities that are very labor intensive like, let's say, the vegetation management part and the module washing part, what we found out is that they are usually not included in those, let's say, service contracts. And that's a very significant portion of the annual cost to maintain a solar power plant. So the numbers that we calculated, and that's a global average, is that those activities are between 25 and 30% of a solar power plant. Of course, it will depend on where it's located. If it's a desert area, of course, you're going to have a lot more time dedicated to wash the panels. But those activities that are vital for the project, they are not included. So we are, when we talk about those figures, the dollar per kilowatt, they are not including everything that you're going to have to do in your project. And I'm sorry, I sound like a broken record, but I believe that's one of the main concerns that the industry should have here in terms of like benchmarking themselves and
Well, that's the best thing you can do, right? When people aren't hearing the things you say, is you just have to keep repeating. But yeah, you're right. Look, we see the same things, right? In ancillary services, module washing, vegetation management, aerial inspections, in some cases high voltage, erosion control and mitigation, those types of things on a site, typically for utility scale sites at least, constitute anywhere from 30 to 50% of your annual OPEX cost. So if you have a quote all-in contract where all of your PM and all of your CM is at $3 as an example, which we can talk about the relative veracity of that as well, and we'll do that next. You can assume on a worst case basis there's at least another $3 on the ancillary services,
which
puts you at around $6. What I have always said, really going back, I think almost 7 years, and it's even more true today because of inflation, is utility scale sites are going to end up falling somewhere on an all-in basis between $6 to $8 a kilowatt, or $6,000 to $8,000 a megawatt for your OPEX. That includes everything, right, that you need to do. That includes all those things. And I know you and I talked about, cost versus pricing. Like, what are you guys seeing in your modeling?
Yeah, so that's exactly how we started the conversation, and I can share some numbers with you. The latest survey we did was last year, and we are about to start a new one this year to look back in 2021. So looking back to 2020, what we've seen is that prices for, let's say it's an average for utility scale, we found out that the price was around $9 per kilowatt, and that's including everything. Okay, just to make sure we are here.
What size plants were you looking at?
Because it's an average, I would say 100 megawatt project size.
Yeah.
And our model that shows the cost, that's the pricing, right? That's the 9.3. The cost was about 8.6. So when we look into this 8.6 versus 9.3, okay, so what is the margin for those service providers that have performance guarantees, in their contracts? They have to, they are committed to deliver a certain annual energy production number to their clients. So that's why a lot of the takeaway from this exercise is how to keep the O&M value chain profitable. And that's the interest of all the players, because the asset owners, they need companies to back them up on the O&M side and provide a high quality kind of service. So we've seen, and I don't even know the margin, the 9.3 to 8.6, I need a calculator here, but that's not attractive for companies providing these kind of services.
No, and look, I'll tell you, like, flat out, one of the things we talk about here at Origis all the time is we will not take a deal that's underwater. I tell our business development folks all the time, there's two ways to win. You either get the contract or you turn a terrible contract over to a competitor that's going to lose money. Look, I'm not going to sign it, but if they're going to sign it, I'm just going to wait for the owner to be unhappy and it'll be back on the market. And hopefully the owner will have a clearer understanding of what those costs really are and finally be willing to actually pay those to get the quality of service that they need.
Exactly. And we did the projection of how this 8.6 will look at by 2030. And we are projecting a 6% increase. Mm-hmm. So over the last 5 years, every year that when we do our survey, we see those prices going down every year. Now, last year was the first time we saw prices kind of stabilizing. So we didn't see much of a change, like maybe a delta of 2% down or even up. But for the next years, we don't expect prices to go down. And that's something that was a message that I gave in some conferences this year, one of them being Solar Plaza that we met. That's a tough message to give to asset owners, just because the industry is so used to have costs going down, both CapEx and OpEx. Yeah. But this dynamic is about to change, I'm afraid, and we should all be just ready for that.
Yeah, it's much like a lot of things in our world today. We were at that conference. I don't know if you may or may not have been in, but I was on a panel and I gave that message directly and without, qualification. Yeah. If somebody's willing to tell you something that you don't want to hear, that risks that they may not get your business, you really should listen, because they're probably telling you the truth.
Yeah, that's right.
If somebody is telling you exactly what you want to hear, they're probably lying to you. Or at least they're telling you, they're leaving details out. Like, hey, sure, we can do this at this price. That's great, no problem. But we carved up the contract, so a ton of stuff is out of scope, and there's all these other costs you're not paying for, and you're going to find out about those later, and you're going to be surprised. Because that is the way the O&M industry has responded to the cost down pressures that have come from the solar industry, the owners and developers as a whole. They've responded by continuing to give lower and lower prices, but everyone needs to understand that is not coming out of margins that the O&M companies are making, because they're already squeezed as far as they can go and have been for a long time. It is coming out of scope. It is coming out of manning. It is coming out of training and tooling and expertise. It is being carved out in all these other areas so that it comes around later as a surprise.
That's very much correct, Michael. Yeah. And I appreciate you saying all this, because coming from a service provider, that you are living this every day, right? Yeah. And one thing that I want to really emphasize here is that we are seeing a lot of technology improvement, and we consider that in our model. So we consider that aerial thermography, for example, is increasingly replacing IV curve tracing done by technicians, with a lot of time spent in the field.
And safety risk.
Correct. Yeah. So we have this all modeled, but still, with the inflation and with the labor challenges we are facing now, it does not offset all the cost increase that we are going to see over the years, the technology improvement.
Are there technologies, digital, physical, whatever, out there that show some promise in maybe helping us to achieve some lower costs and some efficiencies that aren't possible today?
Yeah, so I believe aerial thermography has been the biggest disruptor, right? That's something that is really being used now, is commercially available, and we can see already the results in terms of how many hours of technicians we can save with using this kind of technology. Moving forward, I believe that focusing on the two kind of very labor-intensive tasks, module washing and vegetation management. We have some promising technologies out there. They are not yet commercially available in where it makes sense in terms of CapEx investment and the return you're going to have from those investments.
You don't think so? Which ones specific? Like, what have you guys looked at specifically in your modeling? Because I'm seeing a lot of new things out there. So I'm curious what you guys have actually looked at.
So we've seen some waterless module washing technologies. And maybe because they have not been deployed in very high scale kind of way, we can't come up with numbers really justifying this investment yet. So we don't have that many examples. So we've seen waterless module washing solutions. We've seen some robotic lawn mowing solutions as well. But still, they are not 100%, at least the technologies that we have access to. You still need someone, you still need a technician there overseeing what the machine is doing, or even kind of correcting some missed places, especially for the vegetation management, depending on the terrain and depending on how you have your modules distributed. Yeah, I don't know if you agree with that, or.
I mean, honestly, I will respectfully agree to some and disagree with a little. So let me tell you what I see out there. And you're right. Some of the waterless washing equipment and techniques, they, even the robotic techniques like SunPower, really pioneered sort of robotic cleaning when I was there, but that required people to move these units row to row. So it didn't completely eliminate
human
labor.
Presence. Yeah.
You have some companies like, and I'll use them as an example, Solar Clino, which is actually out of Europe, that is working on robotic solutions that are fully autonomous, that don't require that human intervention. Because ultimately, the way you save money on these things is by eliminating labor.
Correct.
Right? And then if you eliminate labor, then the incremental cost of those additional washings, mowings, and everything else, it comes down to some number near zero, which then allows you to do them more often and drive production, right, as a result. So there's sort of a win-win out of that when you approach it that way. But even Solar Clino's products today, I would agree with you. I think they're getting better and better, the autonomous cleaning solutions. But they're still not fully autonomous. There's still that human that has to be involved, as an example. You also have, like on the vegetation management side, really all the big providers, everybody from Caterpillar to John Deere to Husqvarna, are all working on these different solutions. And there's folks like Husqvarna that are trying to scale up what are essentially residential, like they're kind of like Roomba kind of things, that go out and do that stuff. But those don't. It's like trying to swarm attack a site. It just doesn't work, and they're not designed to live in the field in those harsh environments for that long. You have then you have other companies like Scythe Robotics, or some others that are basically gas units that have been made remote control or autonomous, but you still have to deliver them to the site, drive them to the site, drop them off, and move to the next location, right? Yeah. So there's still that involved. Again, it's still not fully optimized. The only one that I've seen in the space that really is optimized for solar is Renew Robotics. That one is pretty good, but I think, it doesn't necessarily economically work out for every site in every location on every scale. That's something you have to understand what the pros and cons and the gives and takes are and model it. But that one at least is optimized for solar because it does operate in the field fully autonomous and theoretically doesn't require human intervention on a regular basis.
But it all depends on how the terrain is and
yes.
So I believe we are again in the right direction, but we still need a little bit more of time to see those technologies kind of improving, and that's happening so fast. And we have done, Michael, if I may here, just invite the audience of this podcast maybe to visit our website. We have done a ton
Please.
of studies.
What's the URL? Where can they find it? Tell us.
Yeah, so if you go to woodmac.com, you have the power and renewable section in the webpage, and there you can see kind of the solar section of it, and then O&M. And we've done a ton of comparisons and how much could an asset owner save if they use those emerging technologies. There are lots of reports available there. So yeah, I welcome all of you to take a look and reach out if you have any questions. I'm glad to.
I may go take a look at it just so I can get a call and tell you
I think you've seen most of them, but yeah.
So, I have generally seen over time utility scale sites, and in this case, I mean manned sites. So we're talking about you can, at about 40 to 50 megawatts, you can get a person. You really need 2 people to do NFPA compliant, NFPA 70 Echo compliant operations. So that takes you to like the 7,500 megawatt size or so. So you really see efficiencies on costs in that 100 megawatts and bigger, where you get into that 6 to 8 range. I think when you go below that, that's what drives your numbers up above, 8, as you said. And then on the DG side of things, where you've got the Toonsis, the driving cat, and you're paying for him, while he's transiting back and forth, we typically see DG to go anywhere from 8 to 10 or even more when you get down to like rooftops and carports and things that are more complicated and are quite small. I think you guys see similar numbers, but if somebody goes to your website and looks at that, do they see regional? Do you have it broken down with regional variances? Because, dry type cleaning of panels, for instance, doesn't work in the Southeast because it doesn't take off sap, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So do you see regional variances and is that in the models that people look at those resources?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and something that we've done, again, analysis on. We've compared, let's say, high labor states with low labor cost states. We did a very interesting analysis on California and South Dakota. And we do have those variances. Does not cover all states in the US because we also do global, right? So you can see very clear, for example, Chile, which is a desert, compared to, let's say, US, right? But we do a certain analysis over a certain states in the US, and you can see that difference. And it's related to a lot of different factors. It's related to labor cost. It's related to the need to module washing or not, vegetation. It changes so much. And also the concentration of megawatts per square feet, right? Because again, the density of power also impacts the cost to maintain a site.
Yeah, I mean, that's where bifacials help, right? Because what I see from an acreage ratio, the bigger plants on monofacial will run anywhere from 7.5 to 8.5 acres per megawatt. And when you get into very densely and efficiently made large scale, bifacial plants, they can run anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5 acres megawatt. And that's because you have what I call the interstitial areas, which is really a biological term, but it's like the connective tissue of the site. It's the area along the fence lines and the roadways and around the AC stations and things like that.
That makes a difference in the
that are not under the arrays. That's right. And the bigger the plant, the less on a ratio basis you have of those interstitial areas versus what's underneath the arrays. So you get just a little more efficiency out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I know we're over time a little bit, which is great because I always like to pack as much in as possible, especially when I get a real expert like you here to really talk to us. But one, I'd like for you to touch back and give your website name again because I really want people to go and see those resources. But I also would like, do you have any sort of final words to owners, financiers, developers, the folks that are really focusing on these costs and trying to understand them?
Yeah, so website, www.woodmac.com. you're going to see the power and renewable section, and you can go to solar, and you're going to find not only our forecast, but O&M kind of analysis and technology analysis. So I invite you all to access the website and and enjoy, because it's we have a lot of information there. Regarding final takeaways, I'm going to sound as a broken record again. My message here is really to start comparing apples to apples. Don't be misled by $1 per kilowatt figure. I believe each site is different. Also considering that they are aging, right? We have a lot of sites now that are 10 years old, and they will require even more kind of special attention, given that inverters should be repowered. Even the project should be repowered, inverter should be replaced, and that's also a special cost on the structure of maintaining a solar power plant. So I believe that each project is different, and having performance guarantees by service providers makes a difference in the long term. Just make sure you're looking into all aspects to make your solar power plant have the optimal AEP you expect. And just be very realistic about what to expect, and to have the returns you're looking for.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I disagree on some level with performance guarantees coming from operators, but we can definitely dig into that subject.
Oh yeah, that would be interesting.
Another time,
sure.
And let's debate on this one. Let's do something we disagree about. Would you like to come back and do another one on that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
We'll talk about performance guarantees versus availability, response times. Is that something that you guys have a lot?
I would love that. Actually, I come from the wind industry, and the wind industry works with performance warranties, right? It comes from the turbine OEMs into very long-term service contracts, and that's been a successful kind of business model. So yeah, let's talk about it.
But those also come from the OEMs in the wind industry, which is different structurally from solar. Listen, I don't want to get into it now. Let's save a little bit of that fun disagreement for later. But everybody who's listening to this, you heard it here first. Leila and I are going to disagree and fight over this topic in a later session. But for today, at least, I am so glad that we have you here. You have shown yourself to be an expert and a power player in this industry, and you are welcome to be here on Power Players anytime.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was really interesting to share my views with you, and also hear from your experience at Origis, and looking forward to discuss the next topic about performance warranties, wind versus solar.
All right, we're going to schedule this one with you here soon. So get your boxing gloves ready, and we'll go at it over that topic. Thank you so much, Leila, for your time.
Thanks for having me.
We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Sure.
Take care now.
Find summary thoughts on this topic and more insights into operating your clean energy assets at origisservices.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Power Players by Origis, critical thinking to deliver the clean energy promise.